Imagine a flight piloted by Mo, Larry, and Shemp. Imagine if there was an emergency situation on that flight. How do you think that would turn out? Well, the passengers on Saudia Flight 163 figured that out the hard way. Why did the Three Stooges matter in this equation, and what came of that flight? Well, sit back and get comfortable as I, Detective Hudson, investigate.
This is the final boarding call for Saudia Flight 163 with service to Jeddah.
July 13th, 1979. The night was like any other in the chaotic land of Pakistan. Hot. The kind of heat that sticks to your skin. It makes you question why you even left the ground in the first place. As the sun began to set, Saudia Flight 163, an L-1011 TriStar registered as Hotel Zulu-Alpha Hotel Kilo, stood on the tarmac at the Quad-e-Azam Airport in Karachi, Pakistan, like a racehorse ready to lurch into the sky. The air was thick with anticipation and the usual quiet tension that follows passengers into the belly of a plane. Everyone on board had their reasons for flying, some chasing dreams, others running away from demons, but little did they realize that they had just stepped into the gates of hell. In command was 38-year-old Mohammed Al-Khoder, a captain who flew the DC-3, 4, 9, 707, and 737. Mohammed had nearly 8,000 flying hours, nearly 400 of which were in the TriStar. A captain with that much experience, you would assume he knows his stuff. But like the old saying goes, assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups. Mohammed was described as a rather slow learner, needing more adequate training, slow to grasp concepts, and struggling with things that very few students seem to have struggled with. Second in command was 26-year-old Sami Hassanin, a first officer who joined the airline in 1977 and had previously worked as a trainee. Your second in command should be able to carry the other half of the weight that the captain cannot carry on his own. But Sammy, unfortunately for him, had a rather weak set of limbs. Unlike the typical qualified pilot, he was expelled out of flight school for poor performance, among other issues. He had a rather questionable track record as far as successfully completing tests on the first try, or any try for that matter. Completing the questionable sandwich of a flight crew was 42-year-old Bradley Curtis, a flight engineer from the then recovering nation of Poland. He had been qualified as a captain of the Douglas DC-3 and was then assigned to train for Boeing aircraft. However, he failed to qualify as a captain or even as a first officer because he just didn't meet the requirements. And in fact, he struggled so much that he was forced to pay for his own training as an L-1011 flight engineer to keep his job. Mohammed, Sammy, and Bradley, or more accurately, Mo, Larry, and Shemp, had the kind of qualifications that not even Spirit Airlines would consider. The flight would start in Karachi, make a stopover in Riyadh, before arriving in Jeddah. The flight had passengers from all over the world, including the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and even North America. It was indeed a melting pot, and the flight was pretty diverse too. Most of the passengers were poor Pakistanis and Saudi pilgrims traveling to Mecca for the traditional Ramadan holidays. Many of them have never stepped foot aboard a plane. There were also stories circulated by many flight crews that the pilgrims were not averse to pulling out a portable stove and cooking a meal aboard the aircraft. At 6:32 p.m., Flight 163 made its way to Riyadh without issue like clockwork. The passengers traveling to Riyadh disembarked and the plane refueled. Nothing out of place, just a smooth night flight to Jeddah. On the flight, the passengers sat back and slowly closed their eyes to doze off on the kind of flight that gives a fireplace in a cozy cabin a run for its money. But that's when the blankets went from warm to hot.
Oh, what's the matter with you? You trying to burn the joint down? Listen, I'm telling you...
Mo, I dropped a knob in the wall and had to get it out.
That's no excuse. That's how guys start fires. Playing with matches in houses. Yeah. Now, I'm telling you, one of these days...
Hey, I smell smoke. You chewing tobacco?
No. You idiot! You did set that joint on fire. Go on, get some water. Hurry up.
"7 minutes into the night flight to Jeddah, the crew was paid a visit from good old Bitchin' Betty, informing the crew of an onboard fire. So the three Stooges encounter an emergency situation. What could possibly go wrong? Well, Flight Engineer Curtis went into the cabin and returned to confirm the smoke. The thrust lever for Engine 2 became jammed as the fire burned the operating cable and was subsequently turned off. The crew then returned as swift as a leopard back to the Riyadh International Airport. And at 9:35 p.m., the aircraft touched down and continued all the way to the very edge of the runway before stopping at the last taxiway, burning nearly 3 minutes of possible evacuation time. According to one of the rescuers on that night, "It was absolutely horrible. We got the alarm that one of the Saudia flights was in trouble and returning to the airport. When our crew arrived to assist the evacuation and rescue operation, we realized the plane had not stopped on the runway. Instead, it continued to taxi for several minutes until coming to a halt on a taxiway." While the crew had claimed the engines were shut down, the fire rescue team said otherwise. "We ended up chasing the aircraft for about 3 minutes until it stopped. When we got there, one of my crews screamed over the engines that he could see a fire in the aft section of the plane. The wing engines were still running like a wild bronco, making it unsafe for the rescue crews to approach the aircraft. Within 3 minutes of the aircraft coming to a halt, contact with the crew was lost, but the engines were eventually shut down." "I was stunned. There was no evacuation in progress, and the engines were still running. As a result, we couldn't attempt a rescue. It was just too dangerous. From the time the plane stopped until the engines turned off, 3 minutes and 15 seconds had elapsed. By this time, all communication with the crew ceased." In spite of the raging fire inside the cabin, the doors weren't opened. In fact, the first door had to be opened by the rescue crews about 23 minutes after landing. And according to one of the rescuers, "What I remember most that night were two things. We frantically worked to open the door. We knew people were dying inside. When I put my gloved hands to the door, I felt a searing heat unlike anything I'd ever felt. The palms of my gloves almost melted away." As the rescue team tried their best to contain the situation, they were then overcome by a flash fire that burned the cabin to a crisp. "The other thing I will never forget was when we opened the door, we first saw the bodies of the flight crew. The women, so small, under a pile of bodies with the passengers on top of them, up to the roof." Soon after, the rescuers were then consumed by a flame of dread and despair, as they soon realized that no one was coming home. No one was going to the hospital, because all 301 occupants were no more. They were all stacked, like cordwood, like pieces of cordwood.
Well, okay. It's dry. Keep moving. Give me that hose. No! Give me that hose! No! Let go, will you? No. Will you let go of it?
I know how to work.
I'm a bike king. Hey! The fire's in there! Okay.
So, what went wrong? Well, the investigation found that the fire started in the C3 compartment of the cargo bin. Saudi officials found 2 butane stoves in the burnt-out remains of the airliner, and a used fire extinguisher near one of them. In short, it burned hotter than a night with Ariana Grande while chugging a bottle of Everclear. It burned through the cabin floor and caused the passengers to move to the forward portion of the cabin. It was also determined that the crew resource management was nothing but a foreign language to the pilots. Lapses in communication resulting from power distances between the junior and senior crews. Analysis of the CVR found that a power distance may have taken place as the captain repeatedly ignored requests from the flight's chief purser to order an evacuation. As such, the aircraft's cockpit voice recorder stopped recording before the emergency landing due to fire damage, and while the exact reason for the captain refusing the order is unknown, his behavior and his actions during the flight were believed to be a contributing factor to the incident. In short, acting like Moe from the Three Stooges does not a successful evacuation make. Not to mention the crew's less than stellar track record. Saudia was then put on the chopping block for their decisions to put all 3 of the crew members in the same flight deck. The passengers and crew failed to evacuate the aircraft in time. On top of that, nearly 23 minutes of valuable evacuation time was burned along with the aircraft, further sealing the fate of the occupants on board. It is assumed that the passengers and flight attendants were incapacitated during the landing roll. Either that, or they didn't feel it was safe to attempt to open a door on a moving aircraft, which of course is understandable. But either way, the aircraft is known to have remained pressurized during the landing roll, as the cabin pressurization system was on standby, and the aircraft was found with both pressurization hatches to be almost completely closed. And because of this, it still was even more unsafe to open the doors whilst the engines were still running, only adding on to the already dysfunctional evacuation. The crew were still found in their seats, and all the victims were found in the forward half of the fuselage. Autopsies were conducted on some of the non-Saudi nationals, including the American flight engineer. All of them perished from smoke inhalation and not burns, which indicated that they had died long before the R2 door was opened. The source of the fire in the C3 cargo compartment could not be determined. Originally, it was believed that the fire started because a passenger used a tea kettle in flight, but the investigation found little evidence of that possibility. In the aftermath of the crash, Lockheed redesigned their planes with the glass laminate structural reinforcement in their cargo bins. Airlines revised their crew resource management training and guidelines. The FAA and various international aviation agencies made improvements to fire suppression, rescue, and evacuation protocols. And many other airlines, of course, would give more careful thought to the crews that they would put in charge. Not just the crews who were put in the flight deck, but who was in there with them. But all in all, what did we learn? The exchange rate of time is $1 million to 1 second. If there's flames, you put them out or you run like hell. And if your crew makes you think of this, you might need to rethink your company's practices. What are your thoughts on Saudi Air Flight 163? Do you think the crews should have been in the air to begin with, or should Saudia have chosen its pilots more wisely?